Matt, who represents a couple of ventures, and Matt's here to talk to you about interact with the community as well as the xPand cohort. And an xPand cohort is a mixed mat of various projects from various dimensions. For example, someone in the social side space, someone in the DAO side, someone doing something cool with 3D arts and blenders. Pulsar is hardcore into DeFi. Ryan is representing and clubbing artists together. Hyperia is more of a B2B sort of a network for blockchain enthusiasts to come up and create products on top. So, for everyone who's tuning in for the first time, Matt is a talented speaker, a founder of a couple of companies, including Outlier Ventures, Fetch AI, if I'm correct, Matt, and Move78 as well, which is a studio that we got engaged with, Matt. So I'll set the stage, Matt. We're all very excited to get started and hear out from what you have in store for the entire Itheum expand and the community. Over to you, man.
Great, nice to meet you, everyone. Thank you for the intro. I think you overstated it a little bit. I founder of Move78. I've worked with Fetch. I've worked with Outlier Ventures over the years, and lots of experience in sort of crypto and Web3. And really looking forward to sort of spending a bit of time with everyone. I think when we spoke with the Itheum team, who we worked with for the last two or three years, the ask was, meet the team and give some insights into growing products and growing communities in the sort of crypto space. So what I've got today is a sort of 9 key principles, if you like, for sort of things I and the team have learned over the years, and I'll sort of go through those. I've got a few slides, bit of an intro to me, and sort of focus on brand, community, and user experience. User experience, brand, and community at a high level, I think, sort of work all together around growth in the concept of user centricity. And that's one of the big things that I want to talk about, and about really thinking about what the problem is that we're solving, or you're solving in your project or your company, and then how you bring that to life. So Zane, do you want to hit it with the slides, and I'll sort of get into it.
Absolutely, Matt. Here we go, and let's kickstart and learn from your experience, Matt. We've been very hyped up about this presentation, with you, and thank you for taking your time to tune in. So let's get started, Matt.
All right, cool. So here's my notes for the presentation. So like I say, product growth in the context of brand, community, and user experience. And I've got a few kind of models, a few principles, and a few ideas that maybe you can apply. I'm going to skip through it relatively quickly. I will share this deck because it's got quite a few links in it after the meetup as well. And if anyone wants to contact me, I'm on Twitter and Telegram, Matty Boom Boom. A little bit about me. First part of my career I spent in sort of advertising agencies, digital marketing. Worked with a lot of big brands. Worked with big global corporations. About 7 years ago now, I went to work at Outlier Ventures, which is a sort of incubator accelerator company based primarily in the UK, although globally distributed now. I helped set up the accelerator program. That's worked with over 300 projects and still counting now. And I've done quite a bit of work on both sort of network initiation, if you like, so sort of token launches, and then also more recently, particularly in the last bear market where, bear markets are for building, a lot of work on sort of network growth, right? Looking at things like, how you engage users, how you get people, but either from a B2B perspective or from a sort of a product-led, like user-led sort of growth perspective. Some of the companies I work with here, or we've worked with broadly in the team. And yeah, a little bit about our company. Broadly speaking, we help emerging tech companies grow. We do a lot of work in Web3. We love to work on things like propositions, product development, and go-to-market strategy. So very similar to some of the stuff we're going to talk about here. And I guess what I'm going to show is kind of like a consolidated sort of an essence of some of the things that we've learned. At a high level, right? Maybe not anyone could launch a token, but like it's significantly easier to launch a token and sort of like do all of the hype building and pump narrative and all that stuff than it is to actually grow a product. And I think one thing I'd say is that long-term network value, right? Sort of like multi-cycle um, uh, value creation for all stakeholders comes fundamentally from making something that people want. Um, and in a way, like product growth is very similar in its fundamentals to a lot of startup culture over the last sort of 25 30 years, and probably a lot of like product development thinking over the last 100 years, with different approaches driven by driven by the incentivization, stakeholder participation, and things like that. So uh, in my view, things like the brand, and we can talk about what that is, and community and how you engage community and user experience are all sort of different faces of the same God, right? And that God is really focused around users, right? How do you kind of create something that people want, and then really understand and deliver that value for them and to them. And so I'm going to sort of give you three key principles for each of those, and maybe then we can have a bit of a Q&A or discussion with the team here about any sort of things that sparks. First one is, when people think about brand, I think often what you're thinking about, particularly in the context of getting something going, right, is getting your logo, getting your kind of like visual identity live, and building your website and the first version of the product. I think that's all really important and necessary stuff. But fundamentally, like the brand, if you like, is the story that you're telling, and not the logo, right? Or as well as the logo. And I think what you're actually doing is you're trying to create a set of impressions and beliefs in the mind and the heart of the people that you're looking to interact with, right? So yeah, it's about your logos and your fonts, your colors and all that sort of thing. That's all that's the sort of like, that's the basic requirement. But actually what you're also doing is you're trying to create an experience, how manage interaction, the community feeling and all that sort of stuff. That's what the brand is more than. um, and and so here's some thoughts about how you kind of do that. The first one is, and this is actually a meta point across all of them. You may be familiar with this model. It's from a book actually from a few years ago called the Value Proposition Canvas, which is the problem that you're solving. Your product, if you like, is the meeting point between the customer, right, and the things that they're trying to get, the gains that they're trying to unlock, or the pains that they're trying to eliminate in their lives, or the jobs that they've got to do. And then your gift to them, your product, if you like, which is your value proposition, right? How you can help them achieve those gains, how you can help them solve those pains, and and therefore the products and services that support that. And like that sort of fundamental thing is, like, I think one of the main things that sort of sits at the heart of user centricity, and then sits at the heart of the brand story that you're trying to tell. And yeah, and so there's a link in here for this. As you guys are getting going and starting to think about that, I think this is one thing that there's a whole load of Miro boards around this. If you use Miro or workshop tools to really sort of think about, how does my product help an individual solve some problem, right? And the classic rebuke that people give to sort of crypto projects, or sort of blockchain generally, is, "Oh, this is a solution in search of a problem." Now, I think all of us in this room and who are on the stream don't agree with that as an idea, but I think it is incumbent on us as product developers, as builders, if you like, to think about, how am I meeting the clear and present needs of someone who's going to find great value from this product, and then make sure that that's delivered to them. Another really useful tool is the Google Ventures Brand Sprint. I think particularly if you're like hiring agencies, often they'll try and sell you some big process. This is a tool that enables you to sort of, in a 3-hour period, build sort of like the essence of your kind of story, that then you can kind of go out and maybe more fruitfully build out a brand and the logos and all of that sort of stuff. And a second principle that I think I'd like for everyone to think about as it relates to sort of your brand and your story is that At one level, it's the external face, right? It's the sort of positioning, it's the relationships you have, it's the sort of like the value proposition. Another level, it's the internal story, right? And that this is something that is very important for you as co-founders, or maybe as the early team, and also when you think about kind of community involvement and community interaction. You know, what's our culture that we're trying to create? What's the big vision that we've got as an organization? What's the sort of change in the universe we're trying to make? And therefore, like, what's the mission we're on right now to try and do that? What's the promise and the personality that we're making to all of our stakeholders about how we do that? And I think, you know, like, these are the sort of things that, you know, sort of founder-driven organizations, fundamentally, as early stage projects, tend to be like, you have this inside of you. You had this in your heart, and I think one of the things is like, how do you use that impetus or that momentum that came from you to sort of start this initiative that you're working on, and make that something that's really compelling to all of your stakeholders. And so, a little bit of thinking sometimes, taking a step back, be really clear about, why am I doing this? Why are we together? Why are we as a broader team involved in this? And how does that help tell our story? I think is a really valuable, high leverage thing to do. Um, so that's the second one. And then the third one is, all of that taken into mind. Keep it really simple and focus on enabling action. Often, this is a great way of sort of spending a lot of time thinking about something. And so, set strategic goals, define a proposition, but then think about, what does that mean in terms of what we're going to do? What are the big bets that we're going to do? I'll talk a little bit about testing and sort of like being focused, but I think one of the big challenges that I've seen with very technically driven businesses, founder driven businesses, is that everyone's a clockmaker, right? Everyone's in there. They want to sort of like work on their machine and that sort of thing. And actually, what we have to do, I think, is really think about, how do you get out into the world and how do you test out? And I think that's a huge thing. Focus on enabling action. Um, Community is the other big area, I think, and particularly in crypto, particularly in sort of tokenized open source software networks, right? Where what you actually need is, you need to sort of create a phase shift in the way that a particular market or a particular way of thinking and operating takes place. Is, how do you kind of bring together, galvanize, and then incentivize all of the stakeholders, right? So, and I think a lot of that comes from the way in which you interact, and a lot of it comes from the way in which you kind of create that sort of shared experience. So, yeah, the sort of, a really big thing for me is that community. There's a lot of tactics in community, right? Like, I don't know if any of you have been involved in sort of like, the operations of community management and marketing and memes and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of stuff you got to do, but like, fundamentally, one of the sort of like first order principles is that community is about sort of like understanding the shared beliefs and behaviors, and where is the sort of like common interest, right? And when you think about sort of storytelling for community, I think, yes, you have technology at the heart of it, right? There's a sort of like a fundamental innovation, say in DeFi, or, I know that, decentralized social, there's a lot of sort of like um, very interesting sort of technical concepts, right? But actually, what sort of you need to galvanize the community is to understand what that core truth is, with the sort of like the thing that that is different, and what is that human angle that sort of like connects it together. What does that mean for me, and what does that mean for we, right? And that sort of like that human angle enables the community, right? So what is the shared belief and shared behavior, and then kind of campaigns sit on top of that, right? How do we all together, as a sort of a, as a, a kind of employed team, but then also a sort of like an extended team, and things are fundamentally like ambassador programs, in, creators or influencers, and, like any kind of product growth incentive, token incentivized programs, essentially are sort of ways of kind of creating that common interest for people with shared beliefs, that sort of like will enable growth.
I would
Um,
just want to interfere in Matt and chat a bit more. So you mentioned there's a human angle, and of course there's a community part. Community, I'm supposingly, builds upon the human angle. But how would you advise for all the companies, for all the projects, to differentiate between both of them? Because of course at a web3 level, everything is around community, right? Like the users at the end, and tech is at the core. But is there a way for us to differentiate between the human angle and the community per se?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point. I mean, I think that one of the big things that I think that we do in where we create value for projects that we're working with is very often like builders think about things in terms of functionality, right? And maybe you're probably thinking about the user in a sort of like in a sort of sense in terms of what they can do, but like Plato said there is no learning without emotion, right? And I think sort of like taking something from the head into the heart and making it feel like, what does that mean, right, for us, right? What does that mean for me? And then what does that mean for us, right? I think that's what I mean when I say the human angle, right? So, you know, um, decentralized finance is not only a sort of like a crypto power casino, right? It is also a means of financial independence for many people around the world, right? And it's also a kind of it's a sort of like we were talking about before the stream started, a sort of a libertarian ideal around, personal sovereignty, right? So that's the human angle, right? People who sort of like are sort of like emotionally and intellectually stimulated and believe in that kind of come together to form a community to to um to do that. Now that's not like lending on Aave and sort of like what the sort of like the technical model behind sort of collateralization is, the sort of like the technology, if you like, and sort of like when I say the human angle, what I mean is like you need to really think about what does that mean in terms of a bigger story that's attractive to people, um, uh, to sort of drive that growth.
Yeah,
Great,
awesome. Thank you.
great. That's a great question, Zane. And again, and guys who are in the stream, if any sort of questions come up as we go, just sort of jump in. Um, but community is driven by memes, right? And when we think about memes, we think about Pepe and all that sort of thing. But what is that? What is a meme, right? This is Richard Dawkins, right? He actually invented the meme in 1976. And what a meme is actually a piece of genetic code that doesn't exist in biology, exists only in our minds, right? So just as genes propagate themselves in the gene pool by leaping from body to body by sperm or eggs, so memes propagate themselves in the meme pool by leaping from brain to brain, right? By a process which in a broad sense is imitation, right? So when we think about sort of community being driven by means, I'd like to think about that as an idea, right? What you're doing is you're trying to create simple encapsulation of your core idea, right, or your core value that can leap from brain to brain. Um, um, and how do you do that, right? Like here's one thing that I found works well for us and could work well for you, right? Which is called the recipe for success, right? This is actually from a book uh, called Made to Stick by the two brothers, and it is what stories stick in people's heads, right? What are the things that make people um, kind of be attracted to and remember, right? One, they have to be simple, right? They have to be sort of simple enough to get and to believe. They have to be unexpected, right? There has to be a little kind of, oh well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I didn't know memes came from a book written nearly 50 years ago, right? That's unexpected, right? Maybe you'll remember that, right? They have to be concrete, right? It has to be bound in reality, not some sort of, oh, it has to be simple and understandable, maybe in the form of a story, which we'll talk about in a minute. Has to create emotion, and people remember stories. So I think in terms of community development, how do you tell, how do you frame the interaction in the context of this sort of recipe of success, which is one of the kind of key things, certainly for community growth, right? And if you look at what people do with things like, I talked about ambassador programs, and I come back to some of the sort of like the product growth driven things in a minute. They tend to focus on, if you look at it, they tend to focus on simple, concrete, credible, like someone I trust or someone I believe is doing that thing, stories that drive emotion, right? So I think about that in the context of community. This is the book. Again, there's a link in the presentation. I'll share it online after. And then the last one, this is sort of a meta point, right? Is that that all needs to come together in sort of in like in a content plan and a sort of like an engagement plan that sort of works, right? And one thing is that, you know, sort of like that kind of like content and marketing operations basically connects the strategy with the tactics, right? And often as you're sort of, as you know, heading into the bull market, maybe hopefully some of you guys are going to start seeing significant growth in community and think about how you do that. One thing I'd say is, like, there's going to be a lot of programs that you could create. Like, think about how those things support strategy. So here's a few things that work well for us in the past, right? One is, think about your content in 3 different levels, right? One is your sort of like your hygiene content, your sort of evergreen content, SEO, case studies, onboarding guides, quick starts, all that sort of stuff runs all the time. You have sort of hub content, which is sort of like your community engagement, community sharing stuff. And then you have hero content, which is sort of like the big campaigns, the big announcements. Maybe every 1 or 2 weeks, you're dropping a big story into the community and helping sort of, you know, sort of drive that engagement and attention. The other one is, think about how you're sort of creating these memes and then distributing them with a sort of a create once, publish many mindset, right? You got one story, you know, how does that flow through your meetups, through your community activities, you know, on Discord, you know, on your Twitter kind of content or your X kind of content, you know, long form content, videos, that sort of stuff. And then, you know, think about like these themes in terms of like content strands that you can repeat over and over, right? That's your sort of your kind of content ops for community, and that's one of the big value unlocks and value drivers as you get into that. Something I'd say. And then finally, user experience. When most people think of user experience, you think about wireframes and prototypes and all that sort of stuff, and that's all very important, right? And that's that's the sort of that's the nuts and bolts of product development, right? But user experience actually is sort of connected to that broader point at the beginning around sort of like user centricity and understanding what people need and want, right? So the first principle, or the 7th principle in the big set, but the first principle in user experience, I'd say it's sort of often people kind of intellectually agree and then practically sort of don't do it for various reasons. But like when we're building, we need to test our ideas in the real world, right? And this is sort of like the lean startup model again, which, you know, is sort of quite old now, but, you know, book written quite a while ago, and I think everyone will have probably seen this. You know, we have ideas, right? We sort of like we sort of test the ideas, we build them, we measure them, you know, and we sort of, you know, we go around in a circle like that. But, you know, empowered by data, this sort of build, measure, learn loop, right? Often people think, oh, well, you know, people are going to copy my idea. People are going to, you know, well, it's not ready yet. I don't want it to fail. Often, you know, those things are sort of driven by fear, right? They're driven by fear of failure, right? And actually, like one of the sort of like we work with a lot of teams like since right in the early days, and that's, you're right to think that. You're right to think, you know, it's got to be good enough, right? But good enough is sort of not up here, which is maybe where your dreams and your ambitions are. It's maybe sort of here somewhere, right? You know, and if you're not sort of shipping something before when you need to be feeling relatively uncomfortable about shipping it, right? To be testing it, otherwise it's too late. And you know, so like one of the big things that we do actually is like help organizations. Later stage organizations are often sort of like, you know, relatively lean teams with the sort of core principles around how do you sort of like build confidence and build tests into your thing. So quite often, you know, smoke tests, prototypes, all of these sorts of things are really sort of like being driven by answering sort of 3 or 4 kind of key questions, right? The first one is desirability, right? It's sort of like, does anyone actually want this, right? Is this a sort of a thing that people that is going to solve, is likely to solve a problem in the real world, right? And that can come from, you know, maybe your initial research, maybe there's some sort of like very early stage prototyping you can do, that sort of thing. But what you're doing there is you're sort of understanding the category, validating user needs, right? Then, you know, it might be then there's a sort of like a second stage of testing, which is sort of feasibility, right? Like, is this something which is uh, gonna work? How should we build it, right? Maybe at this point you're building a prototype and you're sort of saying, or you're sort of like, you know, getting something onto a test net and seeing if people are going to sort of interact with it, right? Then you've got sort of viability, right? Can this scale? You know, is the token model working? You know, that sort of stuff. And then finally, sort of scalability. And what you need to do is you need to manage the uncertainty in the process, um, uh, and manage the amount of investment you're putting into it. So in the early stages, your sort of like investment, both cash and time, hopefully is relatively low. And what you're doing is you're sort of like you're managing that uncertainty down so that as you kind of like put significant amounts of resources into building something, you're more confident than you otherwise would have been that it's likely to be something that's going to be successful with your community. And you know, I think one of the big things that works well, particularly well in sort of in crypto product development, is building in the open, right? You know, working with a community, bringing them on board, you know, and sort of being open about what it is that we're doing, testing it, and that sort of thing. And I think, you know, test nets, airdrops, all that sort of stuff, you know, are all great, like hype building things, and they're sort of very, very successful in the current market. But what they're also, if they're done right, what they're also very, very good at is validating product concepts. Um, uh, and you know, one thing, again, another sort of little tip. This is one of our what we call test cards. This is sort of what is it that I'm actually testing with this thing that I'm doing right now, and how will I know if that thing is successful or not? I don't think we've actually invented this idea, but like just sort of taking the opportunity to sort of like think about what we're testing, minimizing the number of different things we're doing at one time, and then actually using that as a spur to action has been a very, very valuable thing in terms of building out products. And then the final one, and yeah, as I think I sort of just mentioned this, but like connect to the community via stakeholder participation, right? So if you look at Chain, you know, literally hundreds of thousands of people following them on Twitter, right? I think they've got millions of wallets connected now to this kind of like really cool, it's almost like ecosystem driven treasure hunt, which is what people are experiencing. Is like, I go mint this honey and I got this right, yeah, and what they're doing is they're kind of airdrop farming, right? But what's actually also happening is that every single product that they're building is being tested right, through a sort of like a big token powered research program, right? So it seems to me to be pretty, as well as being pretty engaging for the community, seems to be pretty smart in terms of how they're doing it. You know, look at you know, Blast have got something. What is it? Something like 500 million TVL locked within, you know, bridged over into their contracts, right? Again, you know, stress testing the you know, the program. Another one I met with the founders a little while ago. Easy, they're building this new type of NFT marketplace, right? So they've got over 1 million wallets connected to this thing now, right? Because they've been running the whole thing on a testnet, right? Using, you know, using testnet tokens, which people have the expectation that they're going to get rewarded for at some point, right? But it's also testing all of their game mechanics, testing all of the sort of like the auction functionality in a way that, you know, it'd be very, very difficult to sort of get that sort of scale of user participation pre-launch in any other way. So the sort of network bootstrapping, you know, I think is one of the sort of Web3 superpowers that that I would be really thinking about how I use in my product development process. Yeah, so broadly speaking, that's it. Brand, think about what product you're solving for your users. Be really clear about your internal external story. keep it really simple. Think about enabling action rather than building big brand books at the stage. Community, you know, that what community is fundamentally is about shared beliefs, behaviors, and a common interest. Think about that recipe for success, and remember that operations connects the strategy and the tactics. Use some of those principles I talked about. And then finally, from a user experience perspective, test your ideas in the real world. Think about hypothesis-driven design. What are we testing and why? And then use that Web3 superpower to connect community via stakeholder participation in your product development process. That's it. 30 minutes. That's what I said, Zane. I said about 30 minutes. I got there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all this great information, Matt. And of course, we'll open the stage firstly to questions from the community and, from the expand cohort. But I'll be very happy to ask you a couple of questions. Loved your principles, man. Like it's bang on, right? But one thing that always strikes a chord in my head was around simplicity, because as builders, all of us want to build stuff that people use. But some way or the other, we complicate the stuff, sometimes right at the start, sometimes in the middle, sometimes at the end. So I want to dig in more with you on how could stuff get even more simpler, and how do what sort of strategies do you use when you're filtering this down to something and dumping it down to something very simple. But I saw that Ryan had a question, Ryan, so we'll begin with you, and stage is open for everyone to come up
Oh,
with.
thank you, Zane, and also thank you, Matt. That was an awesome presentation there. I honestly feel like I learned a lot, and I really like the delivery of it all. I was just wondering, because I'm sure you have experience with a similar issue. A lot of what I'm doing is trying to bridge the gap between the general public, artists and musicians, and the actual crypto space, and that's a big target of my audience. People who don't really have too much involvement with crypto right now, that are aware of it, but they don't know too much about the inner workings. And I'm trying to help them take advantage of crypto, um, even if that's something that they're not totally comfortable with. So a big problem that I see, especially when talking to a demographic over like a certain age limit, they see a lot of the media, they see a lot of the news, and the general consensus is that crypto is a giant scam. You're going to lose all of your money, and they can't get over that hump. They can't get over the fact that so many people think it's a scam. So using kind of those principles you're talking about, what do you respond um, to people
Yeah.
who are uncomfortable with crypto? They're uncomfortable with getting into wallets, and just explaining to them that it's a safe space where there's a community who will help you out. I feel like that's probably the biggest hurdle that I'm trying to jump over right now.
Yeah, and I think that probably resonates with a lot of people, right? And one thing that I'd say is that we are in a frontier industry, right? Where like if you know that Gartner, sort of the adoption curve, or something, not the Gartner, the adoption curve, right? And sort of like, are we in sort of like we're in the sort of like early adopter space right now, right? And I think it's very difficult for sort of particularly early stage projects just starting out, relatively limited resources to kind of solve all the problems that the industry has at the same time, right? Like let Polygon go out there, right, and go pitch Nike and explain to them, all that sort of stuff. I think if you're builders working on sort of like your early stage kind of product concept, and like trying to get those first clues of sort of like product market fit or product network fit, right? I would be really thinking about who are the people who are ready to buy from you, right? Because I mean, it sounds like you're working in sort of like the music and culture space, right? Like getting a meeting with the VP of Sony, right? Who you then go in there and say, "Have you heard about blockchain?" And he's like, "I don't know if that's right for us," right? It's going to be really hard for you to sort of like, get success in the time frame that you're kind of going to get there. Because I mean, I've done a lot of that kind of corporate consulting as well in crypto, and those people are on like a 9 month, you know, let's learn as an organization timeline, right? Like, which is incompatible with what you're doing, right? So what I'd suggest, what you do is think about like who is that market that like feels the pain or wants to benefit from what you're doing right now, right? There's a subset of like the music industry that's really into Web3, right? You know, is it artists? Is it labels, right? And I think it's sort of like finding your community and finding your crowd, right? Like they're one of the there's a book called Zero to One by Peter Thiel, right? One of the sort of like the original sort of PayPal mafia, and he says like find the smallest segment possible that you are able to dominate. You know what I mean? Like sort of going, the whole music industry needs to be different, right? Because rights management or that sort of thing is all broken and blockchain can fix it. Yes, in theory that's true, but like, are you going to be able to do that, right? Like rather than there's this subsegment of electronic dance music here with these artists that I can sort of like build a really great proof of concept for and start to convince other people to do that. So like I mean, it's long term. I believe a lot of these industries are going to go through a sort of like a phase shift in terms of the way that they interact, and I think sort of decentralized technologies and public ledgers and all that sort of stuff will be part of that. It's like we're on a 20-year adoption cycle, right? And what you need to do is you think about within my frame of reference, which is, I don't know what your roadmap is, but let's say it's like 12 to 18 months, right? I've got to sort of like get where I need to get to to unlock my next set of funding, either community driven or sort of privately.
Yeah, thank you so much for your response. Absolutely, I definitely do agree with you. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, Ryan. Great question.
Awesome. Let's hear out if anyone else in the cohort has any questions for Matt, and then we'll proceed with some community questions that have popped up as well. Please, Johnny,
Johnny.
get started, man. Ah, Johnny,
You're on mute.
We can't hear you, buddy.
Mute. Just check your settings. Meanwhile, while Johnny just say hi, and then we'll know. Oh, we still can't hear you, mate. You're still not audible. Yeah, just check the sound settings, man. We see you trying to speak, but we can't hear you. While Johnny fixes this, anyone else has any question from the cohort?
Yeah, maybe one. First off, great presentation. I resonate a lot with the methodologies that you mentioned, like build fast, ship fast, learn fast. But a question maybe, what you've obviously worked with a lot of projects over the time, probably many blockchain-based projects. So what are recurring themes that you see, or mistakes in user experience and mistakes that are easy to avoid but are mostly not avoided?
Yeah, good question. I think honestly, the biggest problem that I see crypto organizations falling into the trap of is it's literally called the build trap. You might be familiar with it, right? It's just sort of we are gonna go away, build something for like maybe more than a year, right? And then we're gonna reveal it, right? And we're gonna build this beautiful you know, golden pyramid out in the desert, right? And then one day we're going to launch the golden pyramid, and everyone's going to come find it, and it's going to be amazing, right? And like the sort of like the tendency, I think, is to by and large is to build too much stuff before you launch it, right? And then once you've launched it, sort of already having an idea in your head about like the next 24 months of things that we need to do, right? That's without being well enough connected to what other people who are actually your users are going to do. And yeah, I think it's probably because lots of people in the crypto world are quite ideologically driven and they're very, very passionate, and they they have this thesis, they have this kind of like belief, which I think you need to do. You need to have in order to be crazy enough to do something like this and to sort of believe that that you can do it. But I think, yeah, sort of some of those things that I was talking about that you mentioned in your beginning of your question is like is one thing I'd say we need to kind of keep coming back to as product people about how we kind of about how we can make our products more successful. I think the other big one is that building sort of token powered networks, right? Like are a brilliant innovation in terms of like putting resources and capital into into projects in a completely different way. That wasn't really possible before. What it does do is it gives you all the challenges of a public company very, very early on in your development process, right? And a public company where a lot of your stakeholders are very, very short-term driven and who are like highly emotional about short-term volatility, let's say, and that can become quite distracting, right? So that's a sort of like mentally a difficult thing, I think, sometimes for people that we've worked with since the early days to sort of like, okay, today my personal net worth is $25 million. So next week it's $15 million. It's like that's very, very hard. And everyone on Telegram hates me. And I'm getting personal death threats and someone's calling me a scam. All of that stuff is sort of, and then you've got to try and build a product at the same time. That's quite hard.
Yeah, man, there's a dark side to things, right? So that's one of the dark side of being, a product owner or a founder. But let's check from Johnny Xmas. Are we good with your settings, mate? Unfortunately, John, still not. Just try
Why
and
don't
talk
you
around your settings. Audio.
post the question into the chat window, maybe?
Yeah, just post it in the chat window. That's the other way, man.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear you out as well.
Yeah, maybe I am better now.
Yes, yes, we
Yeah.
can hear you, buddy. Please go ahead.
Yes, it's better. I don't have to write it down then. Okay. Yeah, I want to resonate on to bounce on the question from Ryan. If your target audience is in majority in the Web2 world, and you want to onboard them on a Web3 environment using wallets and everything, because you possess you want to develop a functionality which is a pain reliever mainly for Web2 users. But will this pain in the Web2 be enough to relieve the pain of using a wallet and making sure that the functionalities are as good as they are in Web2? This must be something where a lot of Web3 projects are facing issues, and where the onboarding is kind of different to treat with Web2 users than with Web3 users. What do you think? Do you have special tricks in order to make the link in between the two, or is it also a question for you?
Well, I mean, there are a bunch of organisations who are working on exactly that problem, right? I mean, sort of like Magic, like jumps straight into my head. I mean, in terms of like wallets, which you were talking about, and they're doing pretty good business. And if you look at a lot of the sort of like the on-ramp, off-ramp projects, like they've had a lot of funding. Some of them are making quite a lot of money. I think Uniswap. Swaps and things like that. There's a huge one of the big category challenges that we've got as an industry, I think, is around like UI, like UX in the broadest sense, right? Which sort of so I think there are a lot of people out there who have got those challenges, right? I guess what my advice would be is don't like find someone who's like, your target user isn't someone who's never even thought that crypto might be for them, right? Your target user is someone who's like, I've only ever kept all of my crypto on an exchange, and I don't feel very comfortable actually keeping things in a wallet, right? Maybe your target user is someone who's kind of, I don't know, Johnny, if you're actually working on wallets, but I'm just using that as an example, right? Uh, my target user maybe is someone who like feels very uncomfortable with fiat onboarding and offboarding, right? And like those are the things that I'm doing. I'm probably not like, you know, like Atlas with the whole universe on my shoulders, right? Going, okay, how do I get the next 6 billion people in the world to know what crypto is and know what the value proposition is? Um, um, like, and you know, how many, like, I mean, crypto's one of the fastest, even despite, you know, all of the ups and downs, it's one of the fastest adoption technologies ever, right? Like, it's sort of like the compound annual growth rate is really, I haven't got the number in my head, but it's really, really high, right? So each year there are probably several millions of people, probably tens of millions of people coming in with the sorts of challenges that you're talking about, right? And like, how do you, like, capturing a big enough section of that market probably is a good business or a good sort of like network to launch.
Mm-hmm. And even on the onboarding process, I think different features should be tested around bringing a document to read or having a video in order to teach people go through the application using wallets, or even having an app making self-doing tours in order to explain how things are going may do the bridge in between different users, and this can be tested through test nets, as you said, and everything.
Exactly. Yeah, great points.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. So anybody else who's got some questions? Anything else? If somebody wants to ask, feel free to interact. But Matt, some community questions as well. So if there's nothing that the cohort wants to ask, we've been hearing something from the community as well, and I'll try and get that just in a sec. But bouncing back to the question that I was having in my head, right? Like, we all want to do something simple, but breaking down something complex. Let's talk about our example of Itheum, and we're talking about data, right? Which is, most of the people don't even know that their data is valuable, or the value of the data, or how to do this, or what they should do, and what sort of intricacies are attached to data. So we're solving a very complex problem, which is data in itself. How can we really break it down to that simple one piece? And what sort of strategies do you advise, or do you advise to your clients, that we can also implement and imbibe and execute in our projects?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jamie. It's been background processing as I've been thinking about the others, and I think there's sort of two different ways of thinking about that, right? One is like is actually sort of kind of a prioritization question, right? Which is what should we do, right? And I think there's a sort of like a fundamental truth, particularly when you're sort of in a frontier industry and you've realized that there's a huge opportunity, right? Is that your ability to generate ideas about what we should do is like vastly in excess of your ability to actually execute and deliver and grow the output of those ideas, right? And so what often happens is you kind of like, oh my gosh, look at that, and that, and that, and that. These are all huge opportunities, right? And it all goes into big lists, and then we're like, well, what should we do, right? And sort of like, I'm a bit minimizing work in progress, minimizing work in progress, and sort of like prioritizing is one of the huge challenges, right? So there are lots of tools for that, like Moscow and Rice and all that sort of stuff, But what, like, that's a sort of, at one level, is a sort of like a product roadmap and prioritization question, right? Which is sort of, you can't do everything, you've got to do something, and in a sense, like making a decision and doing one thing, or doing like a subset of what you could do, irrespective of whatever it is that you're going to do, is probably going to be better, right? Like, so trying to do everything is like guaranteed failure, right? Like picking something and doing it, maybe it will work, maybe it won't, but at least just maybe it will work, right? So that's one thing. I think the other one is, then the other part of the question is sort of like, what should we prioritize, right? And I think that kind of comes back to some of the sort of, principles around sort of like being user centric, understanding what people are likely to do. Like, who is that person? Maybe quite a small group of people, like we were just saying, who are going to get some real value out of something, and then what do they really want, right? And then build for them, you know, and sort of and sort of grow from that way. And yeah, lots of ways you can do that, right? I mean, just talking to people, right?
Yeah.
Building prototypes, you know, launching an early version of your app to your community, see what they like, see what they don't like, you know, all that sort of stuff.
True, true. Yeah, that's true, man. That's usually what we try. We try and focus and break out the complex problem into a single piece and then reverse calculate and talk to people. I think what you mentioned about, when early you're building your product, many founders get lost into the product itself, right? Because they're so passionate about the idea and bringing that to life. And it's innovative in their own ways. But, when you talk to someone who's going to be using it, and bouncing back to your idea of UX, their thought process or their interaction is very different. So yeah, I think that's one way to solve it. But I'll chat more with you offline. Let's have some questions from the community here as well. We've got Bufaridza Vlad, who's got a question on how does I think the question is on screen for you to read as well, Matt, but I'll repeat it, that how does this work with the strategy pyramid of having three layers for community, the first being cult, and the second being the club, and the third being the larger community. And I think he's trying to break it down. Vlad, if you're still here, please pitch in. But how cult being the hardcore members, the smallest amount, the club being you more engaged audience that understands your product and the value it brings. And the last part of this question was the broader community, that maybe they provide some attention to your product and understand the value proposition, but you don't engage at the level you would envision on the market.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that model. It sort of ties in with some of these things like this sort of community idea around 99 and 1, if you're familiar with that. You know, like if there's 100 people in your community, like the vast majority of them are not going to contribute, actively contribute a lot, right? But they're there, right? And they're sort of, you know, and then you kind of, you know, your true hardcore, your true believers, your cult, if you like. I really like. I'm not aware of that cult club community model, but I think I'm gonna. Thank you. I'm going to be using that from now on. I think one thing that I'd be thinking about is what is the role of each of those different segments of the community, and what can you expect from them, and what's the give and the get, if you like, between, right? Because it might be you're sort of, and one thing that I've found working with projects is there's a group of people often who don't actually work for the organization, who are so bought in that they might as well be working for the organization, right? That's the cult, right? This is sort of like, I was working on a rebranding project very recently for a privacy network I mentioned before the stream started. And there are a couple of people who, like, they own some tokens, right? And they're sort of like fully like emotionally bought in, and they're kind of part of the core team now, like in all these workshops talking about like what's our vision, all this sort of stuff, right? That's your cult, right? High engagement, high commitment, and that sort of thing. Maybe the club is like your early access program, the people you go to for feedback, that sort of thing. And then maybe you've got your community, which there are different roles for, and you have different expectations, and they have different expectations. But if you can work that out, I think that's a big value driver. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's three sides of the pyramid. Of course, Matt, I can even relate that we have a product called Trailblazer, which is open to a selected part of the community, right? So there's a broader part of community, and then there's this little cult inside, right? Which is our most active members, let's say. And, there is, of course, something separate that opens up for the broader community as well. So this ties up, man, to your idea of internal, external community part, right? That you mentioned in the presentation. Okay,
Mm.
I hope this answers your question, Bufaridza. And let's check if we still have a few minutes to go. Let's check if there's anything else that's popped up. I think we're good. Anything else from the cohort? Anything that you want to ask? Yeah, Ryan, please feel free, man.
Right.
Well, I feel like there's a chance that this question might be better asked over DM, but I'm obviously very interested in the information that you have and the knowledge that you have and what Move78 does. Um, is it difficult to employ these services? Like, how would a startup such as myself or anyone in the cohort go about actually employing your services and having some of your knowledge available for us when we're starting up?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, just give me a shout. I mean, happy to have a one-on-one. We work with projects from very early stage into sort of like established networks. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that vote of confidence, Ryan.
Well, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Awesome. Johnny, I think you wanted to pitch in as well, buddy. Feel free.
Yeah, I have a very simple question. I'm sure the answer is very simple. What is the good timing for a token launch? You got a product, a prototype, a little community, a big community. Is there any tricks? Is there any idea to have the good timing in launching a token?
That's a tricky one, right, Matt?
That's a
Isn't it?
good question. I guess there's a whole other hour probably there, but I'd say, I mean, the first one is like you're swimming in the sea, right? And the tide is either coming in or going out, right? And it's much easier when the tide is coming in than when the tide is going out.
Yeah.
Hopefully, so that's the first thing. I mean, I think the other one is like what you're doing when you're launching a token, right? Is you are kind of you're however you do it, and I know in the old days it was token sales, and nowadays it's very often like very different sort of like mechanics and sort of. But fundamentally, what you're doing is you're sort of like creating a tribe or building a community, right? Who believe in something, and then you're galvanizing that community to help grow that product, right? So like the sort of like the kind of the ultimate requirement is like do I have a group of people who are with me on this, right? So if you're doing a token sale, you need to, and when we were doing a lot of token sales, we used to do a lot of like, well, where are we, right? Do we have a bunch of people who are following us on social? Do we have a bunch of people who want to, who've registered for the whitelist? All of that sort of stuff, and that kind of gives you an idea about whether you're ready, right? Like,
But today it doesn't really work. Sorry to interrupt, but today it's not only working on promises of a future product coming out,
yeah.
or is it still enough? I think people
I
need
think
to experiment in the same time they want to
yeah.
invest.
I think my point is sort of independent of some of that, right? I guess because what I'm saying is like, do you have when you're launching, you can't launch a token if you've not got a community, right? If you go, okay, this is a Matt token, right? Matt token, and it's launching tomorrow, right? Okay, that's the definition of a shitcoin, right? Okay, and maybe I can get some people who want to buy it, and we can try to pump it on some decks, right? That's sort of, I don't think that's what any of us are talking about, right? Right. What we're talking about is like building sustainable long-term, token networks, right? Like token powered networks. And I think you're absolutely right in that the market is not interested in those kind of 2017 ICO type propositions anymore, right? And that's why I think these sort of like testnet, airdrop, community growth sort of mechanisms of what the market wants, and what builders want nowadays, right? Is because that kind of gives you some stuff. But sort of like the question that you're asking is when's the right time to launch? And I'd say the right time to launch is when other people care about what you're doing, right? And so whether that's they've signed up for the whitelist or they're on your test net or they're, that sort of thing, that's whatever your kind of other people care KPI is, right? That's what we kind of, that's where you need to sort of, because you want to kind of launch into, expectation. You want to launch into people believing in and caring about and wanting the success of the project.
Yeah, community first, expectation second, and then once you have that, you can plan for the launch. Then that's okay. Thank you. Interesting.
Cheers, Johnny.
Awesome, Matt. I think we've just hit time. So if there's last bit, if there's anything else that anyone wants to add on, feel free. If not, we can just close this lovely session. And I would want to just say thank you, Matt. We learned a lot during this interaction, and kudos to you for this super amazing presentation. The principles, the stuff that we learned. Of course, it's a lot about implementation of this, right? And I'm gonna, chat with you a little more on simplicity part, because I think that's one thing that we're struggling to achieve, how to make data so simple and easy to understand. But I'm sure it's doable, with good experiences that you bring on the table. So once again, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for this lovely interaction. You've had hundreds of people from the community tuning in and gaining from your experience as well, Matt. So really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed meeting everyone, and hope to see you again.
Thank you once again. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks very much, Matt. Have a nice day.
Thanks.